Hello everybody, and welcome back to the new Mindscape. In this video I'm going to talk about the modern yearning for re-enchantment. I talked earlier about the film Avatar, which was one of the top grossing films in the history of film. This actually is a deeply religious film. It shows the contrast between an enchanted world, the animist world of the Na'vi, and the disenchanted materialist world of the human corporation. The film dramatizes the clash between these two operating systems. Now, why was this film one of the most popular films ever produced? The reason is because it says something about people's spiritual sensitivity and their spiritual imagination. It's not only because of the action in the film. I mean, there are so many other good action films. When we watch this film, we usually take the side of the Na'vi, who are the good guys in the film. We don't identify with the humans or with the corporation, the soulless corporation. We love the Na'vi because they have souls, and we want to be like the Na'vi. So in a sense, this film is talking about our own dreams, our own spiritual imagination, and the struggles inside our own mindscapes when we live in a disenchanted, materialist world. We're somehow dissatisfied with that. Instead, we yearn for something else. We yearn for a kind of enchantment, for a deep and sacred connection with the world around us. We're not satisfied with the idea that the world has no meaning at all, and that all meanings are purely creations of our own imagination. We yearn for a world in which something in the world communicates to us, communicates meaning to us. So, although Avatar is a relatively recent film, it reflects an old theme in Western mythology. It even goes all the way back to the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve were living in bliss. They were so close to God. In a sense, they were living in a world of pure nature, at one with themselves, with the world, and with God. There they were in a blissful divine garden, but then they fell into sin and were expelled from the garden because they ate the fruit of the tree of human knowledge, the tree of human concepts, ideas, and desires. And so then the life of suffering began. They had to become farmers, to build their own loyal life, to toil and to work so hard. So isn't that similar to the story of Avatar? The idea that we once lived in a state of spiritual purity, and then, owing to an egotistical quest for knowledge, we ate of the tree of knowledge and were kicked out of paradise, and we fell into the world of material needs, suffering, and sin. There's a comparable idea in Taoist thought, in the contrasting notions of xian tian, which could be translated as prenatal, and hou tian, which could be translated as postnatal, and in which, in the processes of life, through our egotistical desires and our impure acts, we gradually drift away from our essential spiritual xian tian nature, the nature that we had before we were born. So we drifted into this world, into turbidity and decline, which leads unto death. So in a sense, Taoism also has this yearning to go back to the Taoist Eden, to the world of immortal fairies, or the world before our own birth, the world in which we are truly who we are, connected to our uncarved, pure essence. So, in both the biblical and in the Taoist accounts, there's this idea that somehow in our quest for material knowledge and civilization, we've lost our true selves. The idea is that our true self, our soul, is somehow connected to Tao or to God, to the world of the uncarved block that hasn't been polluted or corrupted, that hasn't been carved up by all these greedy and complex human ideas. This theme comes again in the 18th century European Enlightenment, in Jean-Jacques Rousseau's image of the noble savage. So by that time, when Europeans had gone out exploring the earth, they encountered and conquered different peoples, different tribes, which they considered savage and uncivilized. And the Europeans plundered their lands, just like in the film Avatar, humans do to the Na'vis. Now, at the time, most philosophers considered that this was the proof of the superior civilization of the Europeans, and this justified forcing the indigenous people to abandon their way of life to adopt European culture. But Rousseau disagreed. He concluded that material civilization had corrupted us. It had made us clever, crafty, dishonest, and inhumane. And so he said that we should forget all of this man-made culture. Instead, we should go back to this primitive simplicity, just to be like these tribal people, to be wild and pure just like them. Rousseau and others felt that these wild people living simple lives had something in them, had a purity, an authenticity, a humble simplicity which we as modern people have lost. So as modern people, we have this inner conflict, the guilt of the civilized man who pushes forward in the quest for power and knowledge, but wonders if he's losing his soul in the process and feels guilty about it. So in a sense, the Na'vi are comparable to Adam and Eve in the garden before the original sin. The people in the corporation are the human sinners who have become disconnected from the garden, disconnected from nature, from the divine reality, from God or from Tao. They've cut themselves off and they've become very greedy. So in a sense, Avatar is telling the same story again. This is a story about an attempt to go back to Eden. We fell out of the garden and we're dreaming of going back. So the story in Avatar is inspired by real-life conflicts between mining companies and tribal societies in the forests of the Amazon, in Brazil, Peru, Venezuela, or similar types of conflicts in Papua New Guinea, in Indonesia, and other places. The culture of the Na'vi is loosely inspired by anthropological accounts of these tribal societies' beliefs, and the film is inspired by the conflicts between modern mining companies and the indigenous peoples. Now, the clash presented in Avatar, to be sure, is extreme. The Na'vis are idealized and humans are demonized. The resolution of the conflict with the Na'vis simply booting out the humans is unrealistic. So, although Avatar does a good job at presenting a stark contrast between materialist and animist operating systems, which can help us to clarify the differences between them, it really says nothing about how to solve the conflict or to reconcile the two. Are the material and spiritual dimensions of life so fundamentally opposed to each other? Does it need to be so dualistic? So again, is this reproducing the dualism of materialism? Is there no way to enjoy the fruits of material civilization while maintaining our spiritual essence? Are there not many people, movements, and governments who are working ceaselessly to end global warming, to fight against disease and poverty, to protect indigenous people, to seek for spiritual solutions. So might there not be a way of upholding a spiritual worldview in the midst of an advanced material civilization? So this is the question that we have to ask each other. One of the main themes of Avatar is this clash between spiritual and materialist operating systems. The clash between the humans and the Na'vis reflects our own inner conflict, the conflict between our material desires and our spiritual aspirations. And that's one of the reasons why the film has been so popular. It's a conflict that we experience in our own hearts and minds as individuals. And it's a conflict that we see in so many social issues today, whether it's global warming, the rights of indigenous people, the protection of nature, and so on. The clash between the spiritual and the material is an old theme in religious history. There's an old prophecy of the Zoroastrian religion of Iran from 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, which says that the development of humanity will go through 3 stages. The first stage is one of undifferentiation. It's like the primordial chaos, the Hundun of Taoism, in which there's no clear distinction between the material and the spiritual. This corresponds to the most primal and archaic human societies, in which the entire culture is enchanted and suffused with the sacred. And then, in a second stage, there's a struggle between duality, a struggle between the spiritual and the material. This began at what many scholars have called the Axial Age, around 700 to 200 BC, in which in different parts of the world, prophets, wise men, and philosophers such as Zoroaster, Buddha, Socrates, Lao Tzu, and Confucius all appeared and taught about transcendent spiritual principles, about the spiritual reality and the life of the individual, and they all contrasted a spiritual orientation with the life of material desires. And we'll talk about this in future videos. And so, since then, many religious traditions have advocated leaving this world, going into a monastery or into a cage, in order to leave the material world and live a purely spiritual life. But in the third stage of the Zoroastrian prophecy, a new unity is attained, in which the spiritual and the material are integrated at a higher level. In previous years, many students have commented, they've expressed their hope for such a unity at a higher level. Some scholars say that we're entering a new axial age, a new phase of spiritual and religious transformation. So perhaps this new phase will represent a search for a higher unity, just like in the third phase of the Zoroastrian vision. So this requires a new operating system. Today we've lost the balance between our spiritual and material lives. We know that we can't continue to live in a society dominated by the uncontrolled pursuit of wealth and power. But we know that we can't become Na'vis, and we don't really want to either. We know that an extreme pursuit of spiritual worlds, ignoring material reality, would be dangerous as well. So how do we find a balance? How can we build a new operating system that integrates the material and the spiritual dimensions of life?